more than 66% of Gaza's population are refugees. Their story of forced displacement may have started when Israel was created in 1948. But it's far from over. The latest chapter is Israel's attempt to expel them from their land once and for all. Since the war on Gaza started, 90% of people have been displaced at least once, turning memories of Nakba into a living reality. This time, broadcast live on television. A new report by the Israeli rights group BTselem suggests that Israel's goal is to turn the temporary displacement of Palestinians into a permanent one, using destruction and starvation to engineer depopulation. Almost 90% of the Gaza Strip is designated either as Israeli military zones or included in Israeli forced evacuation orders. Israeli officials declared Gaza's ethnic cleansing as a war objective, pushing people from the north of the Strip into concentration zones or so-called safe evacuation zones in the south. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is still pushing for the transfer of Palestinians out of Gaza altogether.
You're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing.
Shortly after these remarks, the Israeli cabinet established a new unit tasked with executing the departure of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the Strip. A similar strategy is being carried out in the occupied West Bank, where the largest forced displacement since 1967 is underway. 40,000 Palestinians have been driven out of their homes in refugee camps, at times at gunpoint.
The soldiers harassed us to leave. They asked me, "Why don't you move out of here?" I said, "I have no money to rent or build a new place." They said, "Go to France, you'll have a salary and a good life." They want to evict us in any way possible.
Meanwhile, in Israel's Negev area, demolition orders for Palestinian homes have quadrupled since the war started. Legislation banning the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, isn't intended merely to stop its operations. It attacks the organizations that preserve the status of Palestinians as refugees. Among many Israelis, there's wide support for forced transfer, seen as a solution to the so-called Palestine problem. The problem being Palestinians' presence on their land. The solution, expelling them from it. Nida, Ibrahim, Jazeera.
Rami Khouri joins us now. Rami, you're a distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut. You're joining us from Boston in Massachusetts. Look, we've spoken many times on this program before, and if I recall correctly, you were among those who said very early that Israel's ultimate goal was to drive Palestinians out, whether it was the Gaza Strip or even the occupied West Bank, to decrease the Palestinian population. And this week, Israel's leading human rights group BTselem assesses that displacement is indeed part and parcel of what it calls a genocide.
Yes, Cyril, thanks for having me. The goal of the Zionist movement from 100 years ago and the Israeli state from 75 years ago has always been to push out the Palestinians, as many as possible, to get them out of Palestine so there could be room for a big Jewish state. They've succeeded in creating the state. They're expanding that state, and they're still doing what they've done for over 100 years now, which is to push the Palestinians out by any means. The early Zionist leaders wrote this in their memoirs and in their letters and in their memos. It's all documented by historians, Israelis and Arabs and others, that there's to create a Jewish state in Palestine, which was 93% Arab in 1915 or so, that they had to get rid of the Palestinians somehow. And this is what colonialism is all about, and settler colonialism. So this is not new. You know, what's significant about this BTselem report is it gives you that historical context very clearly. And, of course, that is done by a Jewish, Israeli, credible human rights institution. And they make a very important point in the report that what has been going on in the last 70 years is a context in which Israel used violent and discriminatory methods to control the population, do demographic engineering and fragmentation of the Palestinians. And that's shifted now to a policy of destruction and annihilation. That's pretty significant. Those are pretty strong words when Jewish Israeli groups talk of annihilation. I think the world has to take that pretty seriously. So this is really what's going on now that's so significant. And that's why there's a groundswell of international support now for the recognition and creation of a Palestinian state. But there's one, if I can just add one, there's one problem with what we're hearing from Canada and France and England and all these states is that they're still dealing with the Palestinians as colonized subhumans, that the Palestinians are not eligible for a state on the equal terms with the Jewish Israeli people. The Palestinians have to meet certain requirements. They have to earn their statehood. They have to be supplicants, and they have to be good subjugated people who go along with the terms that are imposed on them, and this is what they've always refused to do. And this is why Hamas grew, and Fatah, and the PLO, the resistance movements. And so we're at a very important historical turning point where Western colonial imperial traditions are colliding with the heroic resistance of the Palestinian people for 100 years and massive, massive international support now from even Western governments. And even in the US, in the Democratic Party, about half of the Democratic members of Congress in the US are now voting for an arms embargo on Israel. So this is a slow but steady movement towards justice in Palestine for Israel and Palestinians.
Yeah, that vote didn't pass the Senate in the US, but you are right in making the point that never had so many senators in the U.S. It was 27 Democrats, I believe, actually voted in favor. Look, the question I wanted to ask you is where do you think this effort to move Palestinians off their land is going to go? Because, yes, Israel has been able to subject Palestinians to all sorts of violence. Yes, they have laid waste to Gaza. Yes, they have displaced people in both Gaza and the occupied West Bank, and not forgetting occupied East Jerusalem. But in terms of decreasing the Palestinian population and pushing them off the land, they haven't actually been that successful.
They haven't. They've been successful in the past through direct war actions, attacks, whether it was in the 1930s and the 40s and later in the 60s and 80s and now today in the West Bank, by directly attacking the Palestinians in their home communities, whether it's government forces of the State of Israel or freelance terrorists and ethnic cleansers like the settler groups. But they can't do that forever. And this is what's so significant now, that the international community, including Western powers, are telling the Israelis this is not acceptable. We can't just sit and watch this, partly because the Western powers, including individual officials, could be held legally liable for complicity in genocide. And this scares the daylights out of them. So I think they can't succeed in continuing to attack the Palestinians or starve them to death to get them out, because there's now a huge counterwave of support for Palestinians. And how they work out a resolution that lets Israel exist securely and legitimately and lets the Palestinians be self-determined and get their state and live securely and peacefully. How that happens is up to the Palestinians and the Israelis, and that's going to be difficult because there's a lot of bad blood between them. But we know historically from 50, 60 years of negotiations that there are ways that these two people can live together with equal rights for both sides. And so we're at this really significant historical junction right now.
Rami Khouri of the American University of Beirut, always good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.